use your phone? We need to call our mom.
This happened back in the 80s. I was between 9 and 10 years old. I was an only child at this point, and my mother was a single mum. She had taken all the money she had and bought a trailer and some land and moved out to the country. I can still remember how she installed the septic system, installed the plumbing and an electrical pole, and how we wired that to the house. This had given me great fascination with electricity. I was always helping her with these projects. I grew up knowing a lot more than most kids about these kinds of things. We lived in a rural area in East Texas, on a 2-acre tract of land. Houses were sparse and situated quite far apart, so not a heavily populated area. I was a lonely kid for the most part living out there. I digress. I'll move on to the day they came. My mum was busy with something in her room, which was situated at the far end of the 72-foot trailer we lived in. I went into the kitchen for something and heard a knock at the door. I went to open it and found 4 kids standing outside, 2 boys and 2 girls. I opened the screen door and the larger of the boys asked,
Can we use your phone? We need to call our mum.
I was immediately suspicious because where had these kids come from? I've lived here a few years and knew all the kids in the neighborhood. I remember looking at the larger boy's eyes and thinking something was different about him, but couldn't put my finger on it. I shrugged and opened the screen wider and let them in. I left the front door open as I took them into the kitchen and pointed to where the phone was. The larger boy picked up the phone as my mum called to me. I ran into my mum's room and she said, "Who was in the house?" I told her a bunch of kids wanted to use the phone. She looked angry and said, "You don't let anyone in the house. Tell them to leave." I walked out of her room and back to the kitchen to tell them they had to go, and found the phone off the hook. The front door was still open and the screen door closed. I ran to the door and outside to look for the kids. They were nowhere to be found. They couldn't have even had time to walk or run across 2 acres to get to the street. So where were they? After that happened, life was super weird. Mum was always getting sick, unable to find sustainable work, and became heavily paranoid and got into damaging relationships with men. Of the most weird occurrences was when she didn't have the ability to pay the phone bill, so the phone company came and disconnected the phone. However, we still kept getting phone calls. I rarely ever answered the phone, so when Mum told me this, I was skeptical and didn't really believe her. Then one day she was busy outside and the phone rang, so I answered it, and I heard a woman say hello on the other end. It sounded like my aunt. Then, it just all went to static. When Mum came back in, I told her what had occurred, so she went to her neighbours and called the phone company and asked them to check the line that our phone was ringing. They came out, inspected the line at the pole and came inside and told my mum, "There is no way you're getting phone calls. The line is completely disconnected. It's cut at the pole." This happened constantly, even after my mum moved the trailer to another city. In that city, she had failed to pay the bill again, and again, we kept getting phone calls that ended in dead air or strange voices and static. The linesman told her the same thing. There was no way our phone was ringing, but yet, it did. To this day, I really don't know what to make of any of that. But it was also around this time I began to experience things like words of knowledge and clairaudient experiences where I would know things I'd never learned and hear things before they happened in physical reality. I mostly kept these experiences to myself and would just think, how weird. When Mum sold that trailer, we never had those weird phone experiences again, and the clairaudience also went away. A few other weird occurrences. While still living in the country, I was sitting in my mum's bed next to her. She was saying, "It feels like bugs are crawling all over me." I got off the bed and walked over to her dresser. For some reason, I felt the need to look up. on the ceiling, there were millions of tiny spiders. This is no exaggeration. I knew my mum would freak out, so I told her, "Mum, please get up and leave this room." She looked at me with a look of concern and asked why. I said, "Please, just get out of this room." She then gave me a look like I was being impossible. So I told her, "Look up." I had never seen her leave a room so fast after she looked up and saw that mess. Literal arachnophobia. We fumigated the house directly after that several times a year. It could be unrelated, but I have never seen anything like that before or since. After we had moved the trailer to another city, some lights would either dim or get brighter and brighter when we turned them off, until they literally popped. When Mum called the electric company, they sent an electrician out to inspect. He climbed the pole, and when he went to test one of the lines, it literally popped him off the pole and he flew to the ground. He was okay, though a little shocked, pun intended, and shaken. The electric company's stance on the issue was that there was a miswiring at the pole. It was most likely that they missed the ground. Again, could be unrelated, but the circuit breakers never tripped during these episodes. I had this really strange experience last year, and my brother just told me about BEK. I feel like that's what I saw. So last year during Christmas time, my sister and I were having a hard emotional night, and we decided to go around looking at Christmas lights. I was driving and we were just crying and talking and looking at the decorations. There was a meteor shower that night, and we ended up on this super creepy back road with nothing around. No houses or buildings, no streetlights, just woods. Somehow, we both saw a meteor falling in the sky as I was driving, and we both screamed with shock and excitement. As we looked back down on the road, there was a small child on the side of the road. It had a backpack and was just staring at the car with this insanely scary grimace on its face, with huge, black, sunken-in eyes. It didn't move its body, but its head was moving with the car as we drove past. We freaked the hell out, screaming and crying and just in utter shock of what the hell was that. It filled us with such terror, and we were both so distraught and upset. We couldn't stop shaking and crying, and we couldn't rid ourselves of this horrible feeling. I felt guilty for not stopping if it was someone that needed help. But it was in the middle of winter, late at night. Nothing was around that road, and there was no reason for someone to be there. And they weren't trying to flag us down for help, just staring. We called the cops and went home and couldn't sleep all night. I still have PTSD when I drive at night. I hope to have some insight, comments, advice, or help on what happened about 2 weeks ago. I am a little familiar with the black-eyed children phenomenon, but need some help to identify what exactly happened, to help 2 family members who might not have been right since the sighting. In 2013, I moved with my family to a foreclosed 6-bedroom home on 14 acres, straight up in the middle of nowhere in the Poconos. My father and I noticed very weird things going on the second we moved in, but my mother and sister seemed to not notice these things. Everyone besides me and my dad in my entire family are the, "oh, it was the wind" type of people, if you get what I mean. Not going to go into everything that happened there, as it would fall under a different paranormal thread. There is some evidence that the entire area of where this house is located is haunted, as in ghosts and Native American burial grounds and other things. Now, historically speaking, with actual evidence, people settled here around the old mill area long ago and brutally killed many Iroquois Indians. This area is very spread out over miles of heavily wooded mountains. 2 weeks ago, my uncle on my mother's side and his girlfriend came to visit my parents' home. They do this quite often as my parents always have people over for beer, games, bonfires, etc. I just want to start off by saying my uncle is a non-believer, a Harley rider who, to this day, I've never seen him really scared of anything or anyone before this sighting. My uncle and his girlfriend are playing foosball with my parents when they realize it's 12:30 a.m, so they decide to head home. They take all back roads, and once they turn onto Running Valley Road 6 minutes from the house, my uncle's girlfriend sees two figures. They were pretty far away at this point, but it was two small figures waiting to cross the road. Just to mention, there was nothing out here, no houses beside one abandoned one that was still 2 miles up the road. One thing about the vicinity is a cave. These figures were attempting to cross the road to go into the woods, which was very odd because of the time and location. They are now approaching these figures. Headlights start to shine directly on them. Both my uncle and his girlfriend see two young girls, aged approximately 9 to 11 years old, one much bigger than the other, wearing what my uncle best describes as early 1900s church clothing, like dresses to the knee with white cotton shawls or cropped sweaters and flats. Weird, right? What are two 10-year-olds doing at 12:30 a.m. in the middle of nowhere wearing church clothing? They also noticed the bigger child had her arms wrapped around the smaller one, like you would do if she was hurt, scared, or cold. At this point, my uncle's girlfriend is like, "It's children, we need to stop and help." By now, the truck is almost right next to the little girls. Both had their heads held down, so the bigger of the two starts to lift her head up to look at the passing vehicle. Then, both my uncle and his girlfriend notice the girl has no eyes, just black holes, as if they were carved straight out of her face. Girlfriend says, "What the hell was that? You saw that, right? Oh my god, turn around and go back right now." My uncle, scared shitless, takes off, flying to get home. They get home and get into an argument because she wants to drive back to see what was up. She grabs her own car keys and basically my uncle was like, "You're not going back there. We're never going on that road again." He calls my parents in extreme panic and tells them they should start bugging because they know he would never lie or be that freaked out if it wasn't warranted. So my mum starts to tell me everything. Mind you, my family knows nothing of black-eyed kids. Never heard of it before. I send my mum an article to forward to my uncle with some of the very basic info. Young kids, no eyes, dreadful feeling, sometimes outdated clothing, hitchhiking or at your door looking for help, etc. Now my whole family is bugging. Sorry for this being so long, I wanted to give all the info. Please let me know what y'all think, or let me know if you experienced something similar to this. I've had two encounters with them. The first time was 2 years ago or so, in a gas station parking lot off Highway 58 in Tennessee, at like 3 or 4 in the morning. My friend had parked towards the far end of the lot, around the side of the building. I was sitting in the passenger side of my friend's car waiting for him to come out of the store from buying his cigarettes. I was fairly relaxed, enjoying the radio, and then I hear a knock on the window. I looked over and there was a boy. He looked about 12. He was wearing a grey hoodie with his hood pulled up. I cracked the window and asked him what he wanted, and he responded with,
"Can I borrow your phone?"
I wasn't going to let some strange kid use my phone, so I told him that I was sure they'd let him use the one inside the store. He insisted on it though, and it was the weirdest thing because the longer he stood there, the more unsettled and scared I started to feel. I had rolled up the window by this point, and he became something less than aggressive but more than insistent. That's when I saw his eyes. His hood slipped back because of his movements, and the only way I can describe the feeling of looking into those eyes is primal fear. That's about the time he quickly moved to the nearby tree line, and a few seconds later my friend got into the car. He said I was pale as a ghost and asked me what was wrong. At the time I had no idea what the hell that was all about and had trouble describing it all to him. He looked at me strangely and said he didn't see the kid at all. That really got to me. So when I got home, I couldn't sleep and found out exactly what I had encountered. The second encounter happened shortly after in my house. This was about 3.5 weeks ago. I'm a night owl, so I'm up at pretty ridiculous times of night a lot of the time. And I was up at around 3:30ish in the morning, yet again, and watching YouTube videos. Then, I hear a knock on the front door. I would have normally just avoided a knock on the door at that time of night, but my roommate's girlfriend had left only about 20 minutes prior, so I assumed it was her, having forgotten something. It wouldn't have been the first time. So I went to the door and cracked it a bit to look outside. And there was these 3 kids. One looked to be around a 16-year-old girl. The other 2 were little boys who appeared 6 and 10 respectively. They wouldn't look directly at me and held their heads at a downward angle. The porch light cast a pretty heavy shadow over their features, so what they were was, again, obscured. I hadn't forgotten about my previous encounter, but I didn't know any of the neighborhood yet and couldn't just assume black-eyed kids when it could have been desperation standing at my doorstep. I opened the door a bit more, and before I could ask what they were after, the girl said, "Can we come in to use your phone?" I told her I could fetch it and let her use it, but again she asked to come inside. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all, and her insistence grew just like the last time. She stepped from the front walk to the bottom step of my stoop and looked up at me. I saw those eyes again, slammed the door and went back to the living room, a good distance away from the front door. I heard a few more knocks over the following few minutes, growing more aggressive with each volley until they stopped. I didn't dare get close to the door or windows again until sunrise. I've since installed security cameras around the perimeter of the house. So there you have it. Those were the 2 times I've had encounters with BEK. Has anyone else here had any run-ins with these things? The actual encounter happened about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks. I don't really have a concrete schedule right now, so I'm not really sure. Either way, I was walking home kind of late at night, and it gets dark out pretty early, so I was kind of on edge walking home alone. But it's a pretty safe neighborhood, so I wasn't actually that concerned, and I was only like 15 minutes from home anyway. There's a high school that I walked past on my way home. They haven't been opened recently, obviously, and there's a big gate out front that's been locked since the actual proper lockdown started. I walked past it enough that I don't usually even look at it, but something caught my eye that night, and I looked. Through the locked gate that touches the top of the kind of arch thing it's in, so you can't just climb over it. And there's this couple just standing there, facing the bars, looking straight ahead, holding hands. That startled me enough to look closer because it was weird that anybody would be there, especially at 11 o'clock at night. And their eyes were just blank, dull black. No whites, no iris, just black. And they didn't react to me looking at them. But I also just stared at them, making eye contact the whole time I was walking past. I remember turning my head to keep looking, but not really being aware that I was doing it when it happened. Anyway, I guess I actually processed what was happening and turned away real quick and speed walked home because it freaked me out. Ever since then, I feel like things have just been sort of weird. Not in a way I can really put my finger on, just kind of off. Like they got into my head. Anyway, that's what I got. That's what happened. Not really sure why I'm posting it here, other than I just wanted to talk about it somewhere. I've been raised in Florida my whole life, from Orlando to Miami. This took place in Orlando though, in a neighborhood I lived in. Since the time I was a child, nothing like this had ever happened before in that area paranormally related. A lot of crime though. I'm starting college now, And this happened in 8th grade summer going into 9th grade. I was at my old friend's house who lived in the same neighborhood. It was a very sunny day and we hung out for a bit, and I started making my way back very early afternoon. I think around 2 p.m, not even 5 minutes into my walk, a small boy approached me. He was wearing jeans and a green polo shirt that had a symbol on the corner, like a polo shirt would, so I thought he was from an organization. He handed me a card, but when I looked at him, there it was. The black eyes. They were all black completely. I was taken aback so much, I took 2 steps back. Mind you, there was no one around whatsoever. As soon as I got startled and realized he had black eyes, an elderly black woman appeared on the opposite side of the street staring at me. They both wore the same shirt the boy did and had pure black eyes too. Not that it matters, but I have never heard stories of black-eyed people being black, so I mentioned it for that reason. When I noticed her staring at me, this kid still tried to hand me the card, but he never said anything. Ever. And I don't know why, but I took it. Then, my mum came out of nowhere, like a millisecond after I grabbed the card. She came speeding down the street because she knew I was at my friend's house, and she tells me to get in. I do so because I'm scared, and she asks me if I'm okay. Once I'm in the car, she told me she had an extreme sense of peril and doom come over her out of nowhere at home. And she said she dropped everything and got in the car and sped to where I was at. My mother has been spiritually gifted since she was a child. She's had paranormal things happen. She's also a low-key psychic. She took me back home and I told her what happened, and she said to burn the card away from the house that the boy gave me. She burned it, and that was it really. Just a wild sort of a trip that happens sometimes. What do you guys think this was all about? I've spent decades in the military intelligence community, so I don't want to put out too much information about myself on a public forum. However, I'm curious if any other experiences overlap my own. We lived off base in this rundown community that looks like any other rundown community you might find anywhere else, next to a military installation. The apartment complex itself was nice by the standards of the rest of the buildings in our area. At 12:30 on a Friday morning, I was woken up by a series of knocks on my heavy wooden door. I have a rule. One series of knocks is just people messing with their neighbors. But if they really need something, they'll knock twice. Yep. There came the second series of knocks. I expected it to be someone from work trying to get a hold of me, and my cell phone had died. It had happened before. I opened the door and stared down at this kid that I estimate to have been about 6 years old. There was so much about the kid that was bizarre. The eyes feature suggested MBEKs seems kind of trivial. I can't say with 100% confidence that his eyes were all black orbs. I just don't know because the rest of him was such a mess. When I look at people, I have a habit of avoiding eye contact. The rest of his description is as follows. Clothing: grey filthy hooded sweatshirt with hood up halfway, with matching sweatpants. Shoes: unremarkable. Skin complexion: for lack of a better phrase, I would say that he was extremely pale. Not clear if there were blemishes in way of freckles on this skin, or if he was just really dirty. Hair: possible reddish brown, messy, dirty, short. His face was in this grimace of hatred. His expression was like someone who was sucking on the world's most sour candies. Here's the worst part of it. The body odor he was radiating was like something I've never smelled before or since. I've smelled decomposing bodies in war. The closest smell I can relate it to was in Ranger School. In Ranger School, due to the lack of food and rest, often guys' bodies would start to consume muscle for energy. Combined with the lack of bathing opportunities, this creates an odor that is hard to top. But this kid smelled like weaponized foulness. I asked, "Can I help you?" In a flat voice, void of inflection, he said, "My parents don't like you." I responded, what?" He stated, "You'll be okay if you give us something great." I slammed the door on him because I thought he was just screwing with me. He let out this "no." I could hear him on the other side throwing a tantrum like you see toddlers in the store when their parents won't let them have something. Definitely a very strange thing to do at midnight. However, kids running around the dilapidated neighborhood unsupervised was a pretty common occurrence. I just chalked it up to bad parenting. I showered and threw my clothes out because I didn't want that stench on me. I went back to bed because I had to be up again in 4 hours. The strange thing is that the stench didn't seem to linger. I saw this kid on 3 other occasions. The second time I was going out to my car in the morning, and he was standing in the parking lot, glaring at me. When I came home, he was staring at me, standing in the same spot. Then, when I looked out the window hours later, he was still in the same spot, glaring with the same sneer at nothing. I asked my wife what she made of him, and she said he wasn't bothering anything, which was a pretty low bar for that neighborhood. Kids would often run around vandalizing people's vehicles and apartments. I thought about calling the authorities. However, what was I going to say? There's this weird kid. He might need help because he's weird. And he stinks. The truth is that I hated this kid. Now, I have 3 kids of my own, so I don't just hate other kids. However, I hated this one. I hated his smell. I hated that he existed. I felt like he was trying to target and bully me for some reason. No, I didn't want to help this kid. Also, I had these paranoid thoughts of, if this kid hates me as much as I hate him, he's going to lie to the cops and tell them that I had harmed him. It could affect my security clearance. It's best just to ignore him and this will all go away. One time I saw him interacting with kids outside, so I know he wasn't a figment of my imagination. However, he didn't play with them like a normal kid. This girl would come up and grab him by the arm, and he would just stand there and glare at her. There were kids running around him and he just stared at them with that grimace. My wife wanted me to share this experience that I had back in 2011. At this time, I worked in the office of a regional command. I've been read into various truly bizarre government programs. However, thinking about it, I still don't know what to make of this kid. I don't know what to get out of writing this. Maybe someone knows more about this kid, or has had other similar experiences. It's certainly not extraordinary, like some of the other experiences people on here have had. I'm not saying this kid was magical or demonic. I can't rule out that he was truly just some kind of misfortune. Maybe the right thing to do would have been to get him help. However, I just can't get past how much I hated him for no reason. Between that and the smell, my experience wasn't that bizarre. What I do know is that I'm fine with never seeing that kid again. Maybe these black-eyed kid experiences can be explained by kids just being extra weird.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.